So I was on Twitter the other day and I saw Agent Zelenskyy Part 1 on Rumble with no restrictions. So Agent Zelenskyy is a Scott Ritter investigation. Agent Zelenskyy. So I watched it and it was as bad as I thought. I'm only going to show you the first 10 minutes of it, but I'm going to show you the other side of what Ritter's thinking. So if you are intellectually honest, bear with me just through this video. You can make up your own mind. While I was watching it, I was thinking, wow, this is just outright propaganda. Now, propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Now, I don't think that Scott Ritter thinks of himself as a propagandist. I don't even think that he's a grifter, just, like people will say, he's on the Russian payroll. I don't think so. I think he's a true believer that believes what he says. So he is a Russophile all the way through. Now, I'm only going to deal with his arguments. Now, people have taken me to task for this of saying, well, you got to talk about his personal life. I'm not going to do that. That has nothing to do with the merits of his arguments, and that's all that we're going to focus on. So let's watch this, and again, I'm only going to show you 10 minutes, but I disagree with him and show you the opposite of what he's saying about a dozen times through. Thank you in advance for staying with me to the end, and I'm interested in hearing what you have to say when this is done. So here we are, Agent Zelenskyy, a Scott Ritter investigation.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Ritter. Allow me to introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm a former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer. I participated in Operation Desert Storm and served as the Chief Weapons Inspector for the United Nations in Iraq. My main interests are...
So he always goes with those credentials, and those are legitimate credentials. He has some legitimate background. I'm not sure how much that background translates into a Scott Ritter investigation of President Zelensky, but he does have some competence.
My main interests are international relations and armed conflicts in different parts of the world. I'm convinced that we all should know a little.
Okay, so when he's putting this picture of Zelensky, it's not exactly a flattering picture of Zelensky, making him look like kind of a maniacal whatever. By the way, if you look over here to the right, you'll see I Need Ammunition, Not a Ride. That's a book that I wrote about Zelensky. So I actually know what I'm talking about here, and you can find it on Amazon, on Kindle, free with Kindle Unlimited. So please feel free to check that out and see what I have to say as a counter to what he has to say. Let's keep going.
A little more about a person who, to the applause of those I call the global elite, is ready to fight to the last Ukrainian.
Okay, let's stop with the global elite thing. Global elite is basically the new conspiracy theory. It used to be that it was the New World Order, but now it's the global elite. And there are elites in the world. There always have been. But when you talk about a faceless, those others that are like that, be very, very careful, because now you're generally in a conspiracy land. It could be true, but if you can't prove it, you could be lying. So just be careful with that. Let's think critically.
President Volodymyr Zelensky. Mr. President, there have been numerous publications about you, but everything seems to disappear from the web.
That looked really compelling, but let's stop and look at those articles and talk about them. How about that?
Global elite is ready to fight to the last Ukrainian. President Volodymyr Zelensky. Mr. President.
Zelensky's cash haul. What happened here? This was an article about him speaking in Congress. You can see that this is the location and how much he got back for Ukraine from that trip to the United States. I don't know that there's anything nefarious there. He was just appealing to the United States for more arms. Zelensky shakes up a Ukrainian government amid growing corruption scandal. Yes, and he's actually been weeding out corruption in Ukraine, and I've talked about this on my channel repeatedly. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and officials embezzled $400,000 million received from USA by purchasing cheaper Russian fuel, claims journalist Seymour Hersh. I did a video on this very thing where Seymour Hersh didn't prove his source or didn't reveal a source. He couldn't get it published on any legitimate media in the United States, published it on his own blog, and it's picked up here in OP, India.
There have been numerous publications.
Ukraine president embezzled $400 million from fuel purchase. This is the same article twice. Ukrainian officials raid Zelensky's linked billionaire's home amid corruption crackdown. Okay, so this is actually part of him rooting out corruption with a Russian oligarch that he had been somewhat connected to in his days before he was president as a actor and producer. So while this looked ominous, none of these articles really did what he was trying to make them do. Now at this point, you should stop and say, wait a minute, is this guy credible with what he's trying to make me think? Or is it really just trying to persuade me to see his point of view? Let's continue.
About you, but everything seems to disappear from the web. Your image is carefully managed.
None of that disappeared from the web. It's all out there. In fact, I've done videos on most of those things. You can see them on my channel.
And not without reason. You immediately understood why I named my film Agent Zelensky, didn't you? Let's begin.
You have had many film roles. Which one is your favorite? I would say that Servant of the People is probably my favorite.
The year is 2015. It's the premiere of the first season of Servant of the People series. According to the credits, the producer was Volodymyr Zelensky. In reality, he wasn't producing it by himself. Instead, his promotion had begun. No wonder such a role became one of his favorites. Zelensky portrayed the character...
Okay, let's say, he didn't produce it just by himself. It happens a lot. He was a part of that process. He did have backing of someone with much more power and money than himself, but I don't know that that's a big thing. Let's keep going.
Vasily Goluborodko, a school history teacher who becomes the president of Ukraine.
I want to compare that situation to situation where, for example, you come into the plane, you boarding, and you taking your seat, and now you see that man who look like a pilot, who dressed like a pilot, who speak like a pilot, greeting passengers, but who is not a pilot at all, who is an actor who played a pilot in response for your life.
Before the presidential elections...
I'm not sure how useful that argument is, and he's going to go on and say, see, this was a setup, but just...
No one had seen a single press conference from the showman. Only interviews and videos were broadcast. Well, you understand, it makes it possible to retake or rewrite a dumb answer. Almost all...
And that's true, and that is how he conducted his campaign. And it's very much the way that Joe Biden conducted his campaign during COVID. So... I mean, Biden didn't get out very much. He was videotaping from his basement very often. And so, I mean, I would rather see, debates and things along those lines. But okay, that's just what happened. He's right about the facts that that's how he conducted his campaign. But so what? The people voted for him.
All statements Zelensky made were on behalf of the cinematic president, Goluborodko.
To all the people who want to quarrel with us, to divide our country, to separate us by color, by language, and so on, to all of you, I can't speak for myself, as I am a person of culture, so let one of the characters familiar to everyone, Vasily Goluborodko, say it. And all the rest of you, villains, go to hell.
Okay, so Vasily Goluborodko is the character that he played on the TV show, who was a mild-mannered school teacher who gets into this rant, and you can watch this on Netflix, by the way. He gets into this rant about how the politicians are all corrupt, and it gets captured on a video, and then he gets written into the election and wins the presidency. I mean, it's the nature of a sitcom, and it's actually pretty funny. Now, I don't know that this is a problem that he was on TV and then became president. Like, think about, it's making it very ominous that he's saying, well, he was on TV and that set him up to become president because he played this character. I'm not sure that Donald Trump would have become president in 2016 if he didn't have the name recognition from his TV show, The Apprentice, and people thought of him as this decision maker who's tough and can make these hard decisions. I don't think it would have happened.
In all this story, the Ukrainian population became the object of manipulation. The creation of the TV series Servant of the People, in which he was prepared for his role, marked the beginning of imposing an image on people that he could be a potential head of state. And after that, he ran for elections. It was an absolutely skillful manipulation.
Now watch the hand.
So many politicians have come to power after they were actors, right? Here's a list just in the United States of those politicians that were actors before they were politicians. Okay, so that it's okay. They can do that if that's what they want to do. Fred Thompson was a senator in Tennessee. Do you remember him? He was on like Law and Order something years ago. Jesse Ventura, he was a World Wrestling Federation commentator before he was the governor of Minnesota. And how about Jerry Springer? He became a mayor in Cincinnati. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Do you really believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger would have become the governor of California if he wasn't Arnold Schwarzenegger? So that's the argument that they're making, but I don't know how valid that is. By the way, that's only the United States. Here's Canada and all the other countries in the world, and it goes on and on and on and on. So I fail to understand why Zelensky should be some exception.
The final third season of Servant of the People was released just 4 days before the first round of the presidential election. Vasily.
Yeah, because he finished doing his TV show because he started running for election, and what's the problem there?
Goloborodko emerged victorious, became the head of the country, and transformed it into a powerful and prosperous nation. Damn. This is the best pre-election campaign in the history of mankind. And it worked.
And he's right. That was a remarkable pre-election campaign. I'll give him that.
Real life, on the 21st of April, Volodymyr Zelensky defeated Petro Poroshenko with over 70%, 23% of the votes. Clearly, such a scenario was not created in Ukraine, nor by Ukraine. Here, our compatriots are ahead of the entire planet.
Now, this is an assumption that he can prove, that this was some nefarious plot from outside of Ukraine. Why couldn't it have been from within Ukraine? And if he's complaining about the 73% victory, which is a pretty significant victory, he's the same guy that would believe that Crimea's elections were actually legitimate. The official results of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea was a 97% vote for integration of the region into the Russian Federation, with an 83% voter turnout. I mean, have you ever heard of a democratic election that was anywhere near that high? I haven't. I've heard of that happening in authoritarian states and banana republics.
The role of Hollywood in Washington, D.C., it is, first of all, it's not the decision makers, but this is creators of idea, concepts. So if the idea flying well with the audience, you can repeat that idea in real life, in real politics, and it's gonna play. So this is similarity in that Servant of People TV series and a film that Chris Rock produced and directed, Head of State, when it was a black president who come from a Democratic Party and served the people.
Okay, so yeah, Hollywood has influence, and the movie Head of State did come out about a year before Barack Obama became president of the United States. But so what? Is anybody really going to say that Barack Obama only came to power because Chris Rock played the president in Head of State a year earlier? That seems kind of ludicrous. Other factors were clearly at play.
And if this works, why not replicate the scheme in a country close to Russia? And why not elect?
Notice he called it a scheme. And there's a conspiracy here, and this is Agent Zelensky. It's all nefarious. I don't think so.
Someone there based on the same principle. Someone who is unconditionally following orders.
That is a carefully prepared operation by one of the intelligence services or all of the intelligence services in the United States and in NATO to make sure that their guy is in charge and will do what they tell him to do rather than somebody who has ideas of his own.
A carefully prepared operation by one of the intelligence agencies. What a revelation.
So what he is parroting is the Russian line that the United States was creating him or propping him up, which, show me the evidence, the real evidence, not the assumptions that we have here. Show me the evidence.
Michael, thank you for this. It allows us to look at the following facts with an understanding of who is behind them. Let's figure out how and with whose help Washington started pushing actor and comedian Zelensky.
So he just said, let's look at the following facts. That's really interesting. There's a difference between facts and narrative. Scott and I can agree on some of the facts that are here, but the narratives here are two totally different pictures because he's assuming certain things of facts, and I'm not making those assumptions. Let's continue.
Ihor Valerievich Kolomoisky. Do we have any connection? Yes, of course. Well, we have business relations. We are TV partners. We all work for these. How many? 5 or 6 families.
5 or 6 families. Was I rewatching?
Okay, so they're business partners because Kolomoisky is one of the oligarchs in Ukraine who owns a large, massive media conglomerate. So that's what's going on there.
Watching The Godfather just now, as if Zelensky is talking about the mafia. And it seems to be true.
Well, not exactly. Now, if you roll the clock back just a few decades ago, we only had a few channels in the United States that were those sources from which we got our news and media. It's changed now, but it's kind of like that in Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine only became a democracy in the 1990s. They're a little behind the times, and the oligarchs that took power kind of controlled the system. So you had to work within the system.
Kolomoisky is a billionaire and an oligarch.
Yes.
Currently is under investigation by a U.S. federal court.
All those things are true. All those things are facts. He is a billionaire. He's an oligarch. He's under investigation. In fact, he's under investigation in Ukraine. They're after him as well.
For money laundering. Back then, he was a figure of importance, even across the ocean.
In 2014, Kolomoisky becomes the uncrowned king of Ukraine. Not only the governor, not only the ruler of Ukernafta, and head of the bank, that is much stronger than any state bank. He became the leading oligarch.
8 years ago, why was it decided to make Kolomoisky the key player in the operation to bring Zelensky to power? In 2015, Petro Poroshenko nationalized.
Okay, now you're assuming that it was him who was the key player in the decision to do this. So this is an assumption built on an assumption built on an assumption. Got to be careful with that kind of thing. I get that he's trying to paint this narrative, but you still have to be true to the facts. You can't just make the facts say what you want them to say. But this is interesting.
Assets, such as the Ukernafta company and later private bank. There is undoubtedly a personal vendetta at play. During the presidential elections, Kolomoisky was happy to criticize Poroshenko on his 1+1 channel, and at the same time to support Zelensky.
Now think about your own experience in a modern democracy. Have you ever seen a businessman, a powerful businessman, at odds with the current administration? It happens.
Possible to say that it was Kolomoisky who brought Zelensky to power? Definitely not. Mr. Volodymyr has other puppeteers behind the scenes.
Are you dependent on Ihor Valerievich? And could it mean that after your victory in the presidential elections, Kolomoisky will rule Ukraine? I am a completely independent person. No offense, but a man who could control me hasn't yet been born.
And it seems that Putin has found that out. Now, that's my own commentary. You may not agree with that, but this is day 505 or 506 of the 3-week special military operation as I'm recording this now. So,
if Zelensky was really on that rope of Kolomoisky, I predict the private bank will be run by Kolomoisky again, but it's not happened. So that means he has no obligation to do more. He just not putting him in a jail, and it's enough for Kolomoisky to be very thankful for him. After that, he will start playing the card as his masters of puppet want.
So that is speculation, but it could happen. Let's say that could be the way it works. It could be the way it works in the United States, and it could be the way it works there, but we don't know that that's necessarily the case. So all I'm saying is we're making assertions without actual proof, acting as if that is proof.
By the time Zelensky came to power, these puppeteers had already provided him with a financial cushion. It's doubtful that anyone remembered his earnings from the movies.
Regarding Zelensky and his inner circle, it is also important to take into account all the manipulations and financial frauds that characterize this team. Firstly, Zelensky concealed some parts of his stakes in companies before the presidential elections. And then, in particular, his mentor Kolomoisky used them for money laundering.
Empty words? By no means. As I mentioned, we will operate with facts. In the fall of 2021,
he's operating with facts, and then he's shaping it into a narrative. So be careful, but let's listen.
Investigative journalists published the so-called Pandora Papers. Nearly 12 million confidential documents from financial companies in different countries were revealed, including offshore data on 35 world leaders.
Okay, so 35 world leaders have taken their money and put it offshore. Now, why do they put it offshore? So they can avoid taxes. Who's involved in this? Millionaires, billionaires, and world leaders of all stripes. Now, Zelensky actually made a pile of money as a movie star in Ukraine before he was president, right? He was the actor and servant of the people. We've already established that. So that's the background here, but it's looking somehow more nefarious. I'm not exactly sure that I understand why. And as for the investigators searching Kolomoisky, they've been doing this in Ukraine. This is February 1st of 2023. They're actually going after the guy. They're cracking down on corruption, but he's acting as if, well, this is just his sugar daddy and he's just running free. No, they're actually working on clamping down on corruption. Okay.
Vladimir Zelensky and his partners from the Cartel 95 studio.
Whoa. He just said Cartel 95 studio. A cartel is like, the drug cartels and that kind of thing. What he actually should have said was Kvartal 95. What's Kvartal 95? It's not a cartel. Kvartal 95 Studios was founded in 2003 on the basis of the KVN team Kvartal 95, which in turn is named after the 95th Kvartal in a neighborhood in Kiviri. That's Zelensky's hometown. What's the 95th Kvartal? Do you know what that means? It means the 95th quarter, or quarter 95 of the city. It's a section of town. It's like saying the Bronx, or Queens, or Brooklyn, or, right? It's just saying a section of town. So he's turned that into some kind of schemy thing. I don't understand why. He didn't need to call this a cartel when it's clearly Kvartal.
Among them, the Ukrainian president indeed owned offshore companies, including a stake in Maltex Multi-Capital Corporation. Zelensky modestly omitted this information in his declaration. But most important,
yes, he owned this before he became president. He had a stake in this company that owned real estate, and he quietly sold it before he took office.
Importantly, in 2012 to 2016, Kolomoisky transferred $41 million to Zelensky's offshore company.
He could be jailed in a normal country for such an offense.
But this is Ukraine, and Zelensky is its president. And according to the offshore documents...
Well, hold on. Before that, Ukraine is corrupt. We get that. Russia's even more corrupt. We never hear about that. In fact, here's Transparency International. Now, the way that you look at the Corruption Perception Index is that you look at, now this is Ukraine, and you want the lowest score you can have here in the rank and the highest score that you can in the scoring. So Ukraine is 116 out of 180. Where's Russia? Here's Russia, 137 out of 180. Well, that's bad. How about the score? 33 out of 100 for Ukraine, and Russia is 28 out of 100 because, again, the higher the score, the better. So Ukraine has issues, Russia has more.
He is a very wealthy president.
Are you planning to use the state residences? Guys, let some kids live in these residences. Like some vacation camps for people who really need it.
In my opinion, it sounds...
Well, wait a minute. What's the problem with not living in a state residence if he lives in his own residence? Let him do that. There's no problem with that.
Cute, especially when you don't know about the residency he owns. Ready to find out?
Let's talk about
it. Let's go. Firstly, a villa in Miami for himself, worth $34 million. I've been to Florida and can understand the taste of the president of Ukraine. Secondly, a house in Israel.
Well, before we go on to that, let's look at this in Snopes. Zelensky's Florida villa rumor goes viral during war with Russia. And Snopes' conclusion was this: we were unable to find any information corroborating this accusation. And as we noted when the above accusation was made, Ukraine was in the midst of a war with Russia. So there's that.
For his parents on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It's worth $8 million. Europe, Zelensky prefers Italy, Tuscany, the best wines. By the way, one of the most expensive resorts in the country, Forte del Marbi. Houses here are worth their weight in gold. In 2017, together with his wife, he bought a villa 600 meters from the sea. According to the declaration, it was worth about $3.8 million at that time. Is that all? Not at all. From the south, we moved north. Not to Siberia, of course, but to London. Old Center, legendary Baker Street, opposite the Sherlock Holmes Museum. There's another Zelensky residence, an apartment worth $3 million. Why? Probably to stay while visiting his owners with a report. More on that later.
So that's an assumption, but could there be an alternative solution? Well, maybe the alternative solution is just as simple as he had money before he went into politics. Remember, he was an actor. He was a pretty popular actor. He's known for these roles. Here are films that he acted in. Not just Servant of the People, the TV series, but a number of movies that were wildly popular within Ukraine and Russia before the war. Producer of these films here, and then he was a writer for these films. He had money. And so if he has money, he's spending it like our actors spend money in the West. I don't understand what the problem is with that. It doesn't mean that something nefarious is happening. That's a narrative. It's different. The narrative is different from the facts.
Apparently, the real estate was purchased through the company of his business partner, Sergei Sheffer. That's why he's called Zelensky's personal wallet in Ukraine. I almost forgot about real estate. Georgia, not the state, the country. A new multi-story apart hotel in the city of Batumi. You might ask, Batumi? What is that? Well, take a look. It's also a seaside resort. Apartments are under renovation, but an expensive...
I'm still not sure that I understand what the problem is with a wealthy actor spending money. It's not like he was poor and went into politics and then became wealthy. The problem is when you go into politics and then you become wealthy. Here's Nancy Pelosi's net worth. She has a net worth of $114 million from being in politics. Like, that's a problem. $46 million worth of real estate. But again, for Ritterr, it's the narrative that he shapes around the facts. So hopefully this helped you understand equal time to what he's saying, because what he's saying is a very distorted picture of reality. I don't think Zelensky is Agent Zelensky unless you're talking about agent on behalf of the people of Ukraine. Okay, that's my perspective. You can comment on this and tell me how wrong I am and explain. I'm willing to listen, but I don't think that Scott Ritter is seeing this straight. And again, I believe Ritterr is not a grifter. I believe he's a true believer and a Russophile. If you found this informative, you can check me out, subscribe on YouTube or Rumble, and I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the shares, the likes, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for caring about this issue. And thank you for listening to me about this issue.